I'm Connie Anderson. I've had the pleasure of chairing this August forum for, I think, over 12 years now. And I just want to wish everyone a hearty welcome to the Scottish American History Forum. I think most of you are aware that the Scottish History Forum is part of the Arts and Cultural Division of Chicago Scots, formerly the Illinois St. Andrews Society, which was founded, I love to say, way back in 1845, and is now the oldest 501c3 charity in the state of Illinois. The name was later changed to Caledonia Senior Living and Memory Care, and it's located in North Riverside, Illinois. Chicago Scots is dedicated to nurturing Scottish identity through service, fellowship, and celebration of Scottish culture, in addition to support of the Caledonia Senior Living and Memory Care Campus. And for additional information, all you need to do is go to www.chicagoscots.org. And we ask you all to please give generously to our Caledonia Senior Care charity. It's a one-of-a-kind mission that all Scots can be proud of. Now, just one reminder, next month on December 13th, Professor Martin McGregor, who teaches Scottish history at University of Glasgow, will be with us to discuss For Freedom Alone, William Wallace, Robert Bruce, and the First Scottish War of Independence, 1286 to 1329, followed by the way, Dr. Matthew Jennick, who will be here on January 10th, 2026, to present A Great Army of Militia, Pro-Government Independent Companies of the 45. Now, both of these are going to be terribly exciting subjects, so I know you won't want to miss these presentations. Now, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our very own president of Caledonia and Chicago Scots, Gus Noble, OBE. And Gus is going to greet everyone, update you on the latest to Caledonia, and introduce our illustrious speaker. Gus.
Thank you very much, Connie. I am grateful to you, and I want to thank you on behalf of everybody who is both on this call and been on all the previous calls for putting together such an impressive series of lectures and programs. The archive we have now is really unique and something that we see people visiting often, and they come back and watch a lecture here and there. So that's all credit to you, Connie, and on behalf of us all, I want to say how grateful we are to you.
The pleasure has been all mine. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about a couple of events that are coming up, but first I want to reference something that I heard Dawn mentioning just before or just after I came on, and that is our Highland Games next year. We are going to welcome the best pipe band in the world, the four-time champions of the World Championships, in effect, the Rolling Stones of the piping community, the Inveraray District Pipe Band. They are an incredible band. We're going to host a concert, and we've already had inquiries numbering in the close to 1,000. So it's going to be a terrific and rare appearance by the Grade 1 champions. This year, however, before we get to next year, we have a couple of terrific events coming up. I recently got to know Henry Mackintosh quite well through a couple of programs we did together. Henry, of course, is the second person ever to be First Minister of Scotland and is well known as one of Scotland's great statesmen. However, as I learned, Henry also has a great passion for senior care, and in particular, brain health and dementia care. And so we asked him if he would accept the highest honour that we can pay our Distinguished Citizen Award at our St. Andrew's Day feast this year. And I'm delighted to say Henry said yes. He has recently, just last year, chaired a commission to look at the future of long-term care in Scotland. And the report is available and online, and I commend it to you. Along with Henry, we're going to honour with our Kinsman and Kinswoman of the Year awards for outstanding voluntary service, Fred and Chris Veenbass, who many of you will know through our programmes. But with having Henry in town and having his both passion for and purposeful approach to leadership in brain health, we thought we ought to convene a symposium. And I want to thank Dawn for really being the spark and the brainchild of this. She recognised that Scotland is a world leader in brain health, and Henry Mackintosh really was part of Scotland occupying this position as a world leader. He created these brain health clinics and helped to remove the stigma of memory loss in a very powerful way. So we're going to host a symposium entitled Brain Health and Dementia Care, Integrating Innovations and Best Practices from Scotland and the United States. This will be on December the 5th from 8:30 to 12:30 at Concordia University's Centre for Gerontology. Henry will be the keynote and he'll reflect on Scotland's world-leading work in brain health. But we've also gathered some incredible leaders who are doing some groundbreaking work in the field of dementia care. We've got the leaders of the Alzheimer's Associations of both Illinois and Scotland. We've got the chair of the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Elder Law. We've got local universities, Northwestern, the University of Chicago, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and Rush University Hospital. And we have coming over from Scotland, the head of Stirling University's Dementia Services Development Centre, who is known to be one of the most impactful and influential architects in the field of design around dementia. We'll cover public policy and advocacy and law, nature, architectural design and community, lifestyle, culture, and the future of care. It promises to be a fascinating meeting of some very powerful minds. I invite you all to attend, and while space in the lecture hall may be limited, online is limitless. Today, I'm delighted, and by the way, you can find a link to this symposium on our website, and just last night we sent out an APB email, which you should have received. If not, please be in touch and we'll get details to you.
Bravo, by the way.
Thank you. Today, I'm delighted that Liz Davidson will speak to us. She will speak about Mackintosh Illuminated and the work of the National Trust for Scotland. Before I formally introduce Liz, I'd like to say a couple of things about the organisation to which she and I and many of us indeed on today's call belong, the National Trust for Scotland. From the tiniest artefact in many of the Trust's collections to massive estates of forests and mountains at places like Mar Lodge, for which the National Trust for Scotland has a 200-year strategic plan. The National Trust for Scotland looks after so much of Scotland's historic and cultural, natural, design, social, wild heritage. Over 100 sites of historic significance that are run by the National Trust for Scotland. And we've been delighted to welcome and host the Trust's CEO, Phil Long, and his wife, Annie, to Chicago many times. They've become very good friends of the Chicago Scots. And we're also looking forward to welcoming a group from the Trust to next month's St. Andrew's Day Gala. Kirsten Allison and Helen Sales, who chairs the board of the Trust's US Foundation, a board of which I'm incredibly proud to serve. And speaking of pride, the Chicago Scots are extremely proud of our partnership with the National Trust for Scotland. We offer reciprocal membership, so every member of Chicago Scots is also a member of the National Trust for Scotland, and that gives members free access to those 100 plus sites of significance throughout Scotland. That's membership gives you two great organisations, truly a win-win. Today's speaker, Liz Davidson, will talk to us about her role as project director of Mackintosh Illuminated, which seeks to widen and deepen our appreciation of the work of Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his artist partner, Margaret Macdonald Mackintosh. Liz will lead us and introduce us to some of the important people, communities, events, challenges and triumphs that the Mackintoshes encountered during their amazing lives. And I'm particularly interested to hear about the Trust's groundbreaking work to rescue and repair and restore Hill House. Throughout her career, Liz has worked in the field of historic building restoration and regeneration, driven by a strong belief that a good environment builds good communities and places where individuals can flourish to the best of their abilities. You can read all about Liz's accomplished bio on the webpage for today's event. And now all that remains for me to do is to thank you for joining us today, to thank Liz for being here, and to introduce you to Liz Davidson.
Wow, nicely done.
And would everyone please mute your microphones and dim your cameras during Liz's presentation? We'll reactivate all of those afterwards for question, answer, and dialogue.
Well, thank you very much indeed for the introduction. In a second, I will share my screen, and I think that should work. I'm always a bit confused, but I'm just going to say to you, if there are any slip-ups in this, it's because I arrived home 12 minutes ago, which just sounds like I was being very lackadaisical, but in fact, I've arrived home 12 minutes ago in a taxi from San Francisco. So I was out visiting my daughter out there the last 3 weeks, was traveling back. So I left San Francisco at 5:30 in the afternoon yesterday. My body clock is way all over the place at the moment, via Heathrow and then back up to Glasgow. So we landed at about 3:30 and then commandeered a taxi and told them to get me here. Luckily, I live about 20 minutes away from the airport in Glasgow. So hopefully this is going to work as a lecture. I'm going to, now, if I share, there's a share on this part of the screen. Let me see which is the one that's going to work best for what we're doing here. I can share, no, I think it has to be on the shared point on that. So hold on a second. So what I will...
Down at the very bottom, there's a green box that says share. If you click on that and then click on the image of your desktop, I believe you'll be in business.
Right.
Okay, and I've just permitted you to do that.
Excellent. Now, do you have a slide of the Hill House up on your screen?
Not yet, not yet.
Hopefully soon. There's sometimes a lag.
Did you have your PowerPoint open?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Okay.
Hold on, I'm going to get a young person to look at it. Hold on.
Okay.
So there's the share there, which I've pressed. And I wanted obviously to open up on my desktop, which is behind here.
Okay, so go back onto the other.
Oh, sorry, go on to it. Yeah, right. Press that one. Sorry, I need to do that first. Yeah, press on that.
Yeah.
Flora has also just landed 12 minutes ago, so she's brighter than I am, but that's youth. So that should work. Let me see. Now then.
Can you help
Liz?
Liz go to presentation mode, and then we'll be there. It's a beautiful slide.
Yeah, if we can get that into a bigger, actually just do play. If we start at play and have it in the first one. Right. Does that have the Hill House? Yeah. Is that showing now at your end?
It looks
fabulous.
Thank you.
Oh, right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. Because I didn't think I would make this, I'd actually also prepared it with presenter notes, which also I don't want to show you because somebody else was going to have to give these. So I'm now going to have my presenter's notes off to the left. So I'll try not to make that look too rude. Well, actually, you won't see my face.
Actually, we don't see those at all. Not to worry.
Excellent. Okay, right. Well, that, just to go back then for that, that is slightly blurred on my screen here, but it was a rare image actually of the Hill House in all its beauty in a fantastic day one summer before we erected the box over it, which I will come to in the talk. But it's important to see that because we weren't clever enough to think about getting very many good photographs before the box went up, and now of course it's impossible to get those images until it comes down again. But just to place it in your mind, because we don't see it like that at the moment. So the talk tonight, and thank you very much for inviting me, is very much about Mackintosh, also about Margaret Macdonald, his wife, who's been probably a little bit too long put into even darker shadows. As Gus has said, I'd like to describe the project the National Trust have embarked on over the last year in tackling the Hill House itself, and hopefully once and for all the saving of it. Charles Rennie Mackintosh is just exceptional, wonderful, and finest domestic commission. It's about 30 miles outside Glasgow. And the Trust is also looking through the work at the Hill House to actually take a lead nationally in shining a new light on his works. And as I say, also on that of his equally talented wife, Margaret Macdonald. So you've slightly stolen my thunder, but there's no problem in that, Gus, in talking about the National Trust. But you're right, it's only fitting that the NTS, the acronym, is taking up this initiative. It's the largest heritage and conservation charity in Scotland. And as such, the National Trust has a mission to protect and allow access to over 200 buildings, from medieval castles to Renaissance palaces, working farms, crofting homesteads, Victorian printing mills, modernist artist studios. We've just acquired something called the Bernard Klein Studios in the Borders area of Scotland, and Art Nouveau tea rooms, a Mackintosh one. It also protects hundreds of miles of footpaths and coastline, rare species of flora and wildlife, art and furniture collections, and entire islands, all of which play a part in Scotland's history and culture. As many of you will know, that's an image of Culzean Castle in the centre of Robert Burns' country, another legendary figure which the NTS champions and protects the birthplace of. And at Culzean itself, to whom the US General Dwight D. Eisenhower was given his own rooms to use whenever he visited Scotland for his work during World War II. So all very much in that western edge of Scotland. The Trust took on the ownership of the Hill House in 1982 after only 2 private owners previous to that. But just last year, it also acquired the original Willow Tea Rooms. So this places the Trust in the exceptional position of guardianship of 2 of Charles Rennie Mackintosh's finest surviving buildings, the only surviving and only complete design tea room, and his largest and undoubtedly finest domestic commission, both built at the height of his architectural career. With many of his buildings facing an uncertain future or having been devastated by the terrible losses at most obviously the Glasgow School of Art, and I know we have Tony Jones in the audience, so I'm very privileged that Tony's attending this. And with a major anniversary in 2028 of the centenary of his death, the Trust believes it's imperative to once and for all establish Mackintosh as one of the most important British architects and designers that existed. He was born in 1868, one of 11 children, surrounded by mainly women and his sisters. His father was a policeman and curiously at some point changed the spelling of the family name from Mackintosh without a C to, without an A, sorry, an MCK, to the more Scottish and less Irish, Mackintosh with an A. It may be a reflection on prejudices at the time, but we know as a child he was interested in nature and especially in plants and flowers, being tasks along with his father, taken along with his father, to the vegetable allotment, and with some slight incapacities, including what is described in Scotland, it's hard to make it out in that slide, but a skelly eye or a lazy eye. And if you see there, the eye on the right is slightly droopy. He had a rheumatoid, I think, affliction as a child. But certainly what Roger Bilcliffe, who some of you will know of, a very renowned furniture historian and curator of Mackintosh's work and artwork as well, has said is that due to that slight infliction, in his view, Mackintosh did things in 2D rather than 3D, which is curious. So his paintings, slightly later, these are Pot Vendres in France and around that area. There is a kind of, well, there's no foreground and background in a sense. Everything's everything's dealt with in the same focus on detail and complete design. And yet, of course, he also demonstrated an overwhelming mastery of three-dimensional construction and form, which he uniquely harnessed in his use of light and shade, darkness and illumination, when he effectively sculpted in light, whether natural, artificial, borrowed, bounced, diffused, coloured, reflected, or channeled. At the art school in Glasgow, the display of this was breathtaking, yet subliminal, and it infused students without their knowing in the harnessing of light and form and expression. It's really difficult to explain without having been at the art school. At the age of 15, Charles enrolled in the evening classes at that school, not the building he ended up designing, obviously, but an earlier one further down the street, with his already exceptional drawing skills being channeled into the direction of technical drawing and architecture. He wasn't of middle class or aspiring in that sense income. There was no, I think, chance of his artistic abilities at that age being told by his family, yeah, you can go and be an artist. That was not going to happen. So he was a technical drawer, and an architect was the profession that it was channeled it to. His career did begin there for an architecture, but he was soon involved in design and fine art, and arguably perhaps he was always an artist, but being of that working class stock, he had to follow a career that was going to be a paid career. I'm just moving on to my own slides here, sorry. There's little doubt he didn't arrive at the art school, though, looking quite like this portrait photograph. I don't think coming from the south of side of the River Clyde, you'd be able to walk through town to get to the art school wearing that bow tie and arrive in one piece. But at the art school, he met students who attended the day classes. He was at the evening classes. And those are the parents from parents who could afford the fees, and met teachers and mentors, in particular Francis Newbery, who encouraged co-working, positively sought female students to take up the places there, and introduced Mackintosh to subjects such as enameling, repousse, sculpture, life drawing, textile design, and graphic illustration. He may not have taken these, but he would have been exposed to them in the way that the school operated under Francis Newbery. He was especially recognised by that inspirational director of the school, who was ultimately responsible for selecting Mackintosh's competition entry for the design of the new iconic art school. And it's at the school that he met the undisputed love of his life, Margaret Macdonald, seen at the back centre of this image, who he married in 1900 when he was 32 and she was, I think, probably 36, which in the day would have been considered quite old for a woman. And for those who have read any of their correspondence, this was a meeting of total soulmates, almost, well, absolutely undying affection and love. So just to set the context of where we are, the very small red square on that line is where the Hill House is, in the borough of this sizable and genteel waterside town, Helensburgh, which lies just at the southern edge of the Highland Fault, that geological line that runs southwest to northeast to south across Scotland. So if you're English, that means that everybody north of the line wears kilts and has long, straggly red hair, spends their time hunting down stags and eating haggis and playing bagpipes and shouting freedom a lot. And to those of the south of the line, they watch football with an unbreakable hope that the national team will make it to the Soccer World Cup, and they drink whiskey chasers, which is basically a glass of the amber fluid after each beer. In fact, whiskey is probably the one thing absolutely common to both sides of that fault line, and that's no bad thing. But you see where it sits in terms of that central belt: Glasgow, Helensburgh, the waterside, Doon the Water town where the commuters would have gone for business. And Glasgow at the time of Mackintosh, or certainly before and as he grew up, the second city of the empire, as it was then known. And obviously Britain itself at that time having a very large empire indeed. And it was the confidence, I think, that Glasgow had to stage things like in 1901, just at the time the tea rooms were being built, an international exhibition with buildings erected to celebrate its links to the entire world, a huge area in the west of the city of Glasgow, with stands. Nowadays, if I go to a stand, it's basically a trestle table with red and white bunting. But in these days, they built buildings like this as the stand for Canada, Russia, South Africa, France, Scandinavia, Morocco. And these were showcases for industry, the arts and commerce. Most of these were only temporary. Only the one top centre remained at the city as the City Museum and Art Galleries, Kelvingrove. The shed at the bottom left remains as a transport depot at the time. The rest were dismantled. Such was the unshakable confidence and chutzpah of the city at this time, although it didn't escape me that Chicago itself had staged an even larger World Fair in 1893 with equally extraordinary and temporary buildings and events halls. I think probably the nearest nowadays anyway goes to that is somewhere like an Olympic Games, but these things do not happen anymore in the way that they were happening at that time. And I'm sorry, it's quite a busy slide there, but about the same time of this flourishing of creativity and sheer confidence in the city in Glasgow, Mackintosh had started to get direct commissions for buildings, and not just as part of the company he was part of, Honeyman and Keppie. His truly original and highly distinctive style was based not really on that muscular, extravagant decoration and accepted norm of his peers, but on a very fresh new approach, a new way of seeing and creating architecture, taking influence not from classical or Gothic, but from the growing arts and crafts movement in England with its emphasis on a vernacular architecture, making use of traditional skills and materials and forms, but also in Mackintosh's case, a growing confidence in looking at Scottish historical features, mixed with the influence just arriving in the country of Japan, which had opened up to the West at around this time, and of a very specific take on Art Nouveau, where he and Macdonald, who undoubtedly introduced him more into those symbolist pre-Raphaelite forms of design, were able to infuse really what they produced with their own love of nature, of organic form, and of that symbolism. It was a very unique mix of these influences, and leading conservative critics of the time really to call it the spook school, but more balanced opinion to name it the Glasgow style. There's quite a list of buildings there, but the images show a few as better known churches, schools, offices and houses. And you can see at that turn of the century was a kind of tipping point for Mackintosh as he moved from stone facades to that of rendered brick or stone, using a particularly Scottish form of render called roughcast, a kind of cement porridge where the aggregate would create a lumpy, highly textured finish. Historically, this would have been done in lime and sand and local gravel and used to smooth out the imperfections of a rubble wall underneath. But Mackintosh was one of the first architects to really use cement, specifically Portland cement, in not just a practical way, but for aesthetic effect, creating sculptured construction. Portland cement as a material wasn't new. Versions of it had occurred in the late 18th century, and commercially it was patented by Joseph Aspinall around the mid-19th century, mainly for use in engineering, but also for creating the effect of Portland stone, facades on London terraces or in Bath to hide the brick building construction underneath. That is, they were disguising it using it to describe a cheap material and to make people believe that you were living in an ashlar dressed expensive stone building. The irony in using roughcast here at the Hill House was that he built the building in stone, the expensive material, and then he covered it over in the cheaper, even what you'd call a crofter material of roughcast. It was deemed almost anarchic at the time in more conservative circles, with the rear elevation of the art school positively pilloried in the local newspaper of the time as insulting the city. Yet, of course, Mackintosh was not using a cheaper material to disguise anything. He was using a traditional material, albeit it wasn't in lime. He was, as ever, adopting and innovating latest technology in using Portland cement. But he altered it through these technological advances to hark back to a definably Scottish architectural heritage model to explore the possibilities of a new future. So you have buildings there like Marta School at top left, 1895, working down to the fabulous Scotland Street School, bottom left there, 1903. And then the art school itself is the kind of bridge. So it was built in two halves. I feel ridiculous talking about the art school with Tony in the room, but anyway, the front facade was in a pale, quite grubby by the time, so quite dark cream sandstone. But I won't call it the rear facade, it's actually the southern facade, because it's equally deserving of not just a title at the back end. But this was where he had built in brick largely and was using cement. And it was over that period he was designing and really a tipping point in how he used I believe anyway, these materials. I keep going backwards on my slides. Sorry, hold on a second. I've got 2 running here, so I keep on track with myself. Right. The aberration really in those photographs is Scotland Street School. But even here, I think he would have wanted to use rough cast. It just would not have been thinkable, in fact, positively unthinkable at the time, for the more conservative school board of Glasgow City to have allowed what was seen as a crofter's material, cheap and readily available, to cover up a rough building stone, when red sandstone had actually been used to build the building originally. This, in fact, is a misrepresentation of Scotland's building tradition, where even the grandest buildings were, in fact, usually harled or rough cast, as you can see from the, albeit we think based on somewhere like Falkland Palace, Falkland would probably have been harled. Most of the castles in the 16th and the 17th century would have had a coat of lime on it, and the dressings that were proud would have been tooled and made to seem finely dressed stone, expensive stone. But anyway, at Scotland Street, albeit we think he took his influence from the Palace of Falkland further east in Fife, it's almost certainly here that he would, I think, if it was his choice, probably have done that with a render even then. Perhaps not. He was certainly at that absolute point. And again, you see here in Scotland Street, albeit a lot earlier than the art school, well, a little earlier than the art school, he's using these large north-facing glazed, in this case, wonderful round towers in the stairwells to bring light into the school. And the building itself, again, very like the art school. You think it's a solid stone heavy building, but in fact, there's probably far more void and glass to stone in that facade. It's a really wonderful building, and future uncertain at the moment because it's closed and the nursery school at the base not in use. So I've gone back on one. Hold on. Right. I put that one up again. Sorry. I will talk a tiny bit about the article, even though this is not what this lecture is about. But because if we're going to talk about Mackintosh and just how important he was and where he sits, this was the master work, I think. There's no doubt about it. It's here that he demonstrated the evolution of his style and gave rise to him being described as one of the pioneers of modern design in Nicholas Pevner's seminal book of 1949, I think, even featuring the West Elevation, the Library Tower on the cover of that book, a book that shares pages with Louis Sullivan, Mies van der Rohe, Walter Gropius, Frank Lloyd Wright, Corbusier, and which of course contained the masterpiece within the masterwork, the library. And again, this is relevant because when you see the Hill House, there are images very similar to that at the Hill House as well. Sorry, I'm going to move through these 2 slides. I've created a crutch for my own thing. This is his Forest of Enlightenment, appropriate for a library, and complete with the designs for the amazing lights, the furniture, the clock, the 3-story high west windows flooded it with light, and yet also created quiet alcoves for study and contemplation. It exemplifies completely the term, which I can never say, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to say it. Somebody in the room will be able to, but I may well. I'll bring it up on a slide in a moment. You can read it. But here again, what we have is I'm very sorry, and it's very annoying for you guys, me muttering around with my second computer here. But here again, when I was talking about the rear and the front elevation, he harnesses on the front elevation this industrial warehouse style to bring the pure north light into the great painting studios and to create a seemingly symmetrical main facade. But if you look closely, you see it isn't. Well, at the south elevation, he designed this extraordinary castle-like structure at the top of the hill, making full use of the steep drumlin-like San Francisco-like hill that it was built on. And whilst he didn't actually paint this painting, the Summer Palace of the Queen of Aragon, until 1924, you can see that he was already aware of the Summer Palace, although, you know, this is 20 years apart. So the School of Art is the whole topic in itself. which I don't have time to go into tonight. I'm probably not best placed to even. But it's such an incredible and important building, and really I guess the linchpin about everything to do with Mackintosh going forward, and what we hope for Mackintosh in the trust in terms of his profile and his status. There's the word I can't say. So both Mackintosh and Macdonald were very much more recognised in Europe at the time for the sheer originality of what they were doing. In Vienna, in even Moscow, certainly in Turin, in Italy, they were exhibiting and being praised to the rafters, alongside a few other English architects at the time. But the whole European Art Nouveau that had such a strong identity didn't really seep into the United Kingdom, other than through the work of people like Mackintosh and Margaret in a truly unique way. And this whole emphasis on not just the building, but the contents of it, and the lighting of it, and the how it's been laid out and furnished. It's this entire work of art, this 360 total work of art is what we are, we've inherited, I guess, from Mackintosh, and working so closely, collaboratively with Margaret Macdonald as well. That is a very sad sight, though, in the view of, I think, June 2018, when nearing completion of a very comprehensive restoration programme after an earlier fire in 2014, a truly catastrophic fire erupted and basically destroyed everything at the art school that was organic. So only steel, stone and brick survived that inferno. There was a lot of speculation at the time about what should happen to the rebuilding of the art school. Should it be restored precisely, or should it be a modern design commissioned from a living architect? And it's a really fair question, and I have my views, but the stance I didn't agree with from those who at the time said he would, quote, never have built it like that if he was alive now, is that's the stance I can't agree with, because, well, self-evidently, it's true. If the architect had lived to be nearly 160, which is what he would be now, I'm sure he'd have not maintained the same style of design that they practiced 120 years earlier. Mackintosh was himself always constantly evolving. So I don't know what he would have done if he was brought back after 2018 and asked what to do. But neither did those critics at the time. What I do know is that he pored over every detail of this design over a 10-year gestation period of 2 phases of building at the height of his career. And if that fire had happened during the construction period, he wouldn't have redesigned it. He would have said, this is a complete work of design. Here are the drawings, rebuild it again, do it properly. And in the same way as if the last page of the score of the Brandenburg Concerto had been lost minutes before a performance, an orchestra wouldn't piece in something from Taylor Swift as the modern day icon to make it more honest to the date it was being performed, but they'd get another page printed. So my own view on the art school, I must leave it, but it's such a huge topic. And as I say, probably not the best person to speak about it. But my own view is that, like Notre Dame, I think it is a building that is so very exceptional. It does deserve to be rebuilt and rebuilt properly and rediscovered in that process. And I think the trust itself feels that in putting Mackintosh to the fore again, we can hopefully raise the, what would you say, raise the ambition and the optimism and the determination of the city of Glasgow and Scotland to do that. So back to the bigger picture and the focus of the talk tonight, which I have digressed now a few times, the man, his wife, the Hill House, and the role of the tea rooms as well. I hope I've already convinced you about the singular significance of Mackintosh himself, his ability in architecture, design, as an artist. Some of the things here, it's hard sometimes to actually figure out exactly what was done by him, what was done by Margaret. We know that she was involved in the gesso. It was always, nearly always, sometimes they co-produced in the gessos as well. But in the stained glass at the Willow, we know that she was involved in creating that. In the chandelier work, there was co-production from what we can tell. And in the gesso, that was certainly Margaret alone. The building itself, just about everything was designed by the pair for Miss Cranston, the owner. Everything except the crockery, and that's because that had to be willow pattern plates. So I'm sure he'd have done something very beautiful if given the chance, but a willow pattern it was. But after even these works, I just love that slide. That's just picking a few of the textile designs of Mackintosh. Joyful, intense, organic, stylized, riotous, yet ordered, incredible design. I mean, and there are hundreds of these images, some lost actually after his death, which is rather tragic, but just the sheer creativity of him and of his work with Margaret. Even if you just looked at something like, I always think I can make a chair. I'm not a designer, but I always think, oh, if I had the chance, you know, I could do a chair. Look at the sheer numbers of just chairs of totally original design he produced for his buildings. In here, I can see the chair for the Glasgow School of Art Library in the bottom row, our own ladder back chair for the Hill House in the second row, plus the chair you see here in the Willow, also that in that second row, and the much copied Argyll Street tea room chair in the top row, second in from the left. So, you know, how hard is it to design a chair? And I realized when I asked myself that to keep on producing totally new ways to sit down is incredibly hard. There's so few people I can compare him with. But the man that always springs to mind is, of course, Frank Lloyd Wright, born exactly a year and a day after Mackintosh in June, I think June the 8th, 1869. So also a Gemini, and also, of course, of Celtic extraction, Welsh this time, not Scottish. So, but I think the Celts and their mysticism, there's something there, brothers from another mother, perhaps. And if you look at Wright's work, of course, there were so many similarities. Some of their influences both cited deep appreciation of arts and crafts, of nature, Japanese influences, and geometry, the power of the line and shape and its relationship with organic form and material. One of the main differences between them is, of course, that that Lloyd Wright, despite personal tragedy, lived over, I think, 30 years longer than Mackintosh. And it would have been fascinating to see what Mackintosh might have produced if he had lived later. I guess the other thing is, as I've mentioned already, and I don't know enough about Frank Lloyd Wright, but what little I've read, well, I'll just say it in the default position. Mackintosh was incredibly faithful to Margaret and devoted to her. So I think maybe there was a slight difference in the manner of the men there, but both so incredibly iconic in each country and doing the work they did. It would be interesting, as I say, to know what would have happened if Mackintosh had lived longer and received the recognition and the commissions to develop his style. Perhaps he would have continued to develop. And if you look at his last real architectural work at 78 Durngate in Northampton, designed for a private client again in, I think, 1917, but this time he's gone completely glad hands jazz modern. There's barely a sinuous line in there. And just such a, you know, in a few years, just to have changed so completely the style to this, again, riotous, and again, very original, almost shocking and stunning interior. Perhaps, I don't know, perhaps it's part of the vorticism of the impact of the First World War, a time when such deep trauma and chasm had opened up in established society, that the gentleness of his previous nature was perhaps too painful, too powerless to design in, or just maybe this is where he would have gone and continued to go in terms of his designs. And well, earlier, I guess, only a couple of years earlier, while sketching some of his most iconic flowers, and most people will know the fritillaria, he was still just a little bit, I guess, fish out of water by this time. He had left Glasgow, where he painted this. I know Walberswick quite well. He was arrested by the locals because he had a very odd accent indeed, so they assumed he was a German spy. And because he closely observed things, because he was out walking and looking at the plants and looking at the flowers. So this is the point in Mackintosh's own life and Margaret's where they were a little bit cast out, and certainly not settled or even just well-to-do by this time, which they really deserved to be for the work that they had achieved and done by this time. Right, I'm going to romp on quickly to the Hill House in modern day, because I have again been digressing. There's so much to talk about in this couple. To describe this project as rescuing the Hill House, as we have, is not an exaggeration. The other thing that does sound like an exaggeration is that over history it's been dissolving like an aspirin. It's a phrase I encountered when I came to the project a couple of years ago, and I did wonder which spin doctor had come up with that, overly melodramatic phrase, but in fact, it's incredibly accurate. So this is his house that he passed over in 1904 to Walter Blackie, commissioned in 1902. It's a fantastically confident composition of geometric form and massing, illustrating composure and confidence, infusing Scots baronial arts and crafts and even proto-modern styles, whilst inside his love of Japan, Art Nouveau, and trademark genius of light and dark, shade and shadow creates an atmospheric but remarkably functional home for his client, Walter Blackie. And just to show you again where he's borrowing some references from. So this is Crathis Castle, also in the guardianship of the National Trust up in Aberdeenshire. I've actually inverted or mirror imaged rather the photograph here, but you can see the kind of influences he was drawing upon at the time. This is the house in its garden at the top of Helensburgh, so very imaginatively named the Hill House, bordered by hills and forests and adjacent to the John Muir East-West Trail. Oh, I think somebody's come to my door. Oh, right, fine. No, sorry, and the dog is barked. Sorry. It's fine. They can let themselves in. And adjacent to the John Muir East-West Trail across the centre of Scotland, another great Scot who's probably better known in America than in his own home country. And the house was commissioned by Walter Wilfred Blackie, a very avuncular looking man, the owner and managing director of Blackie and Sons Limited, a business generated by I think his great-grandparents in 1809. It was already a successful company, but what took it literally global was the passing in 1870 of the Education Act in England and Wales, and a couple of years later, the same act in Scotland. This made primary education mandatory, and in turn, a sudden need for standardized books for schools. Walter's daughter, Agnes, in her history of the firm, wrote that what they called the comprehensive readers were the first of a stream of school books of every sort, grammar, arithmetic, history, geography, to be published by Blackie and Son in the same year school editions of the classics were issued. Indeed, once their plans had matured, Blackie and Son may be said by 1879 to have entered the educational field at a gallop. By the turn of the century, Blackie and Son was able to produce picture books for infants thanks to the introduction of 3-colour letterpress printing, and their educational output now included books of secondary, continuing an early focus on scientific books that remained throughout the life of the company. But what really distinguished and made Blackie Books exceptional was that under Walter and his art director, Talwyn Morris, who was himself friends with Francis Newbery and with Margaret and with Charles, he was able to establish a direct line of design and creativity with the talent at the Glasgow School of Art, so that they commissioned the extraordinary and groundbreaking people that school was nurturing and graduating, and applied it to the jacket designs of the books. These were no longer just dry school text. They were bejeweled, the exciting, beautiful things to possess and to fire the imagination with. Charles himself designed some of those titles, and they met, I think, through this work. So I did used to think that it was actually a little bit mean that some of those books would have had arithmetic or maths or whatever, and they're being enticed into them by those beautiful covers. And in fact, it's almost an inversion of the house itself, because the house itself, Blackie had said he specifically wanted a grey house with a grey cement hall, a grey slate roof, almost usually anyway set under a grey sky, and grey is what he's got. So the books in the house are kind of inversions of the jacket being beautiful and colourful and pretty and attractive, and the inside perhaps being algebra, whereas the house itself, it doesn't appear at all boastful or attractive in that sense of laying out all its wares, or as houses of the time may well have done. but inside is where the magic lies. On the outside, it was about the sculptural form that they were, and Mackintosh in particular, seeking to achieve. These are the designs that Mackintosh produced. As you can see from the two right-hand images, if I put that in, they're remarkably accurate. You actually did get what it said on the tin when you commissioned a design from Mackintosh. Although I did note after a while, there's absolutely no drain pipes on the sketched ones. In fact, there's no way of shedding any water on the sketches, which obviously he had to reluctantly put in on the house itself. I absolutely adore Mackintosh's drawing style. It's an extraordinary and pretty unique way of drawing. I did say to friends fairly recently that, you know, what I love about it is the sparsity of the line. It's, you know, all this big planes of white. He doesn't feel he has to draw in the brickwork, or there's a few dots there that are representing the fact it's a rough cast surface rather than just a smooth rendered surface, for instance. And they said, well, yeah, that's all very well, but he's drawn in every leaf, every single leaf on that bush and the trees behind the house. And that sky is made up of millions of small horizontal and slightly curved lines. So he put the time in, there's no doubt about it. He just used it in different ways to what most people would when they drew a building. And yet you got, everything was laid out very logically and very practically for the time. The sketches also do show something that wasn't built, the billiard room at the top west of the plan, which I don't know if my cursor will work if I use it on this, possibly not, but it's clearly marked the billiard room. And as you can see, this would have been a rather sizable room, as big as the main drawing room, in fact, and it would have completed the master's side of the house, where Walter could have received business visitors or friends who would either come in the front door and either turn right into the library, or socially, and perhaps later on in the evening, be taken into the billiard room without ever having to step beyond into the family home itself with Mrs. Blackie and the children. And that little postage stamp drawing in the top left is the only thing we have to give us an indication even of what the garden layout may have been if Mackintosh had had some role in the garden. So this is how it would have looked if, from one side anyway, if we had had that billiard room there. And I'm really disappointed it was never built. Very modern in style, stripped, and also forming a projecting kind of protecting bulkhead against the north wind as visitors approached the front door. So I miss its absence, but it fell victim to a change midway in the plans in about 1902 to 3, when Mrs. Blackie, already with 4 children, realised that she was expecting a 5th child. And clearly there was an interesting conversation that took place whereby Walter lost his play den and Mrs. Blackie got the 5th nursery bedroom. So sadly, we never got the billiard room, and that's unlikely to ever happen now. Inside the house, there's an overwhelming feeling of calmness and order, even with 5 children, when housekeeping rules were, I'm sure, much observed as well. And it demonstrates the trademark contrast and care that Mackintosh and Macdonald brought to the interiors, of moving between light and dark spaces, of inhabited walls where you can pull back and take a seat and observe and yet be part of the room without having to be at the center of it. So we have here obviously the bedroom, the dining room, the hallway, and the living room. And we were very fortunate at the Trust that when it passed to us, the family had, fairly unusually, given the prices certainly they would now achieve, had passed down most of the main suites of furniture with the house as well. They felt it was important that it was kept as this complete work of art. So we're indebted very much to the Blackies for that. One of my favourite rooms is probably the hall. This is looking west towards the front door, with similarities to the library at the art school, with its strongly Japanese style screens and divisions, that clarity of line, the precise placing of furniture, bespoke lighting pierced by the shafts of light from the 3 sides, and stylized botanical motifs in the carving, the stenciling, and the stained glass work. From here, you'd pass into the drawing room, which faces south and is flooded with light most of the day. And again, with the building up of the squares and the leaded windows, the kind of Rubik cube table there, the carpet decoration, and the way in which the lines and the shadows are cast across this, changing all the time through the movement of the sun, of course. But it's not just the angularity of the Mackintosh square. The room also has those softer organic shapes of the Mackintosh rose in the stenciling of the walls, and the seat backs and the unidentifiable shapes of very symbolist of the seating bay posts supporting the ceiling, which appear reproduced in the antimacassars of the seat backs embroidered by Margaret. Just very beautiful spaces to be occupying. Upstairs and leading off the dark landing corridors, the white bedroom, again fabulously soft, white, delicate, and very feminine. Here, Mackintosh and Margaret agreed on the arrangement of the furniture, and even the chairs. The ladder back chair here is designed to the exact height of a trellis for the climbing rose stenciled on the wall behind. The shutters in the room are the only ones in the entire house, curved to fit the shallow bay of the window, and when they shut, they block exactly the light from a rising sun in the long Scottish summers, which could start at 5 o'clock in the morning otherwise. And elsewhere in the house, it's this wonderful kaleidoscopic mix of colour, craft, ceramic, and checkerboard, and of course the specially commissioned gesso piece from Margaret, the Sleeping Princess, which takes pride of place in the drawing room above the fireplace. Elsewhere throughout the main rooms of the house, Mackintosh didn't really adhere to tradition and fix in picture rails. As it was well known, he didn't really like to have the vision of this complete work of art interrupted by the mix and match artwork of others, as would have been traditional or even demanded in a Victorian or Edwardian house of standing. But I don't think it suffers for that. So back to the dissolving aspirin. This is an incredibly useful image captured of the house when it was under construction. It tells us so much. From the viewing conditions, we know that the landowner, Colquhoun of Luss, had made it a rule that the whole of Upper Helensburgh had to be constructed of sandstone, and that the stone had also to be bought from his estate, a win-win for a very canny laird. We see here that it's indeed built of stone, but also that the slimmer areas, such as the chimneys and some of the lower utility buildings, are built, we think, in brick. The image also shows the lift heights of the rough casting process. These are the horizontal bands of the rough cast shown by the drying process. I can count about 6 there of about 8 to 10 feet a piece in height. Also, I'm fascinated by things like that ladder, which is so huge and would have been made on site from cutting down a couple of trees and putting the rungs in. But if you'd stood in the middle of that to get to that gutter, it would have bent in like a banana. So it was in an era of, you know, people made it work, but goodness knows how. And fast forward, this is the final building and the almost restless movement and energy of those different facades. From a distance, the rough cast looks comprehensive, complete, and tight, rendering and transforming the different planes of the stone building into one solid series of blocks, shapes, and angles. But if you look closer, and soon the problems are revealed, these skinny dark lines are a network, a veritable freeway of hairline cracks that cover the elevations and allow water to penetrate the sandstone beneath, causing the much softer red sandstone to absorb the moisture and in turn allow that water to move towards the drier, warmer interiors, crossing and breaching floor joists, creating rot and appearing as efflorescence on the inner surface of the painted and stenciled plaster walls. This is not just about Mackintosh's use of Portland cement. It's also about the fact he used it in an unconventional way, spreading it across and along wall heads, chimney tops, window ledges, and parapets. It's also about the fact that Colquhoun of Luss's sandstone was extremely hygroscopic, with very high clay or kaolin content, so very water hungry. This meant that when it was exposed to water, it would absorb it very fast. And this almost certainly happened originally when the building was being rough cast, so that it weakened fatally the bond between both materials. As that rough cast was being applied, the clay substrate of the stone would have sucked in Scotland, the moisture out of it, and it would have never quite meshed and bonded. But Mackintosh's belief in the material was so complete that he not only defied normal detailing and practice of buildings in the Scottish climate especially, but he tried to keep the amount of water shedding design and apparatus to a minimum. So we really were storing up trouble here in a major way. There's evidence of the house leaking within the first 10 years of its occupation. I've seen photographs from I think from the 90s, where the walls are actually running with water after very, very heavy rainfall on obviously very bad rainfall days. So within the first 10 years that it was leaking, and after that there followed successive repair schemes which tried to solve these by a series of techniques, some quite experimental, such as spraying it with waterproofing agents called silins, or drilling into the rough cast and pinning it on with carbon rods while gravity grouting the vertical gap behind both materials, or by installing sills on some of the ledges or capping over the wall heads in lead, as seen here in repair work of the late 1950s, undertaken by one of the first registered women architects of the time, Margaret Brodie, also somebody of interest to us, and we'd like to explore a bit more. She also had links to the art school, and very deserving of attention in her own right. That chimney, by the way, on the west face was always known by the inhabitants of the house as the giraffe chimney, due to its mottled appearance caused by the cracking. You can just about see that in the slide, but I think it used to be even worse. It's not that he hadn't done this before. Even at his earlier smaller house, Windy Hill, done in 1901, Mackintosh had come across the issues of detailing, materials, and the Scottish climate, and their repair and alterations were called for also shortly after completion. But this house doesn't have the issues of the Hill House in some key respects. Firstly, it was built of a local schist stone, a much harder stone, more like a compressed slate. And secondly, it did employ more traditional detailing over most of the buildings. So it has stone copes to the chimney stacks and to most of the wall heads. You can see where he didn't use it on the stair drum tower, and there are issues there of the water just coming down over those horizontal surfaces and into the building even then. We're looking at just what the damp is, where it's coming in from. It's basically everything on the left of that slide, the existing defects. So problems of design and materials, and that part on the right starting to make possible suggestions for their resolution. So it's too probably small for you to look at in any detail, but there are ways that we need to understand the building so much better than perhaps some of the previous actors here that felt it was a case of fix and stitch and repair. We really need to understand everything that's going on with this building in a material science way. This is a fascinating, and I haven't got but I'll happily pass it on. This is a fascinating YouTube video, which I can definitely send the link to, which by a researcher called Dr. Robin Pender. Some of you may have heard of her. And it explores the issues of traditional modern rain protection in buildings. She calls it greatcoats and raincoats, and I've slightly reworded it to call it rough coats and raincoats. But basically it refers to two means of keeping dry, whether you're a person or a building. Traditionally, a building would have been roughly rendered in a thick, breathable coat, usually of lime, so that even if it did get wet, it would act much like a woolen coat, with the rain forming droplets on the uneven surface and being dried off by the action of the wind or internal warmth, and because it had natural breathability. As time's gone by, there's been more and more a move towards rain screen or raincoats, so totally impervious to the wet. And if detailed properly, far more comprehensive in keeping an interior totally dry. But it's always as good as its junctions or its seams or where the openings are. And this is the dilemma of the Hill House. It's wearing the appearance of a greatcoat or the rough cast, but it's been designed in the material of a raincoat, and the seams do leak. As I say, I can pass on to Gus the YouTube video. It's about an hour long, but it's a really interesting one for people who are interested. It's well narrated, let's say, by somebody who knows what they're talking about. But back to finding the solution to it, the National Trust owes a lot to America, as one of the reasons we are where we are now with the project is due to an international grant we received back in 2018 from the Getty Conservation Institute under their Keeping It Modern program, and the amazing guidance we received from its director there in Los Angeles, Susan Macdonald. So we're very grateful indeed to Getty for that. That's really allowed us to embark on comprehensive research on the building, its history of construction and repair, an analysis of material samples, and also to explore the wider topic of modern concrete repair and preservation across the world. It also allowed us to set the Hill House firmly in the crosshairs of wider research and thinking as to the importance and contribution of historic concrete to world architecture. Whilst that work was being undertaken, the Trust took another bold decision to fundraise for the competition-winning design to build a box over the house, just to stop the relentless process of the wetting and drying cycles. This was the winning design by Carmody Groke Architects, based in London, but Andy Groke is a Scot who studied at the Glasgow School of Art. The concept of the box is very simple and is to shield the house from the 200+ days when rain will fall in Helensburgh. So to allow the house to dry out passively and at a steady pace, not forced, and therefore not to create the conditions for further rot outbreaks, but also to allow the public to view the house in a manner never before imagined, with high-level walkways rising and going over the building itself. This was it during construction in 2018, sorry, in early 2019, with a view down south, down to the Clyde River, showing the grid of the planned town of Helensburgh. It also shows the construction of the current visitor centre on the right, which houses the gift shop, services, cafe, plus a lift. So making possible a far greater range of visitor facilities than ever before. It's been highly successful on a number of fronts. It's increased commercial opportunities on the site. It's greatly improved accessibility, transformed the visitor experience, with an associated impact on the demographic of the visitors. So we used to have, well, it's a greater appeal, let's say, to families and children who love the views now possible, and the excitement really of walking over the top of the roofs, peering down the chimneys, and most importantly, it's allowed the building to steadily, naturally dry out with this chainmail vertical fence around it, so that much of the relative humidity is now at a safe level enough to be considered of museum standards. So much so that we've been allowed to take back in May of this year the kimono cabinet, which was Mrs. Blackie's writing desk, the subject of a shared curatorial agreement between ourselves and Glasgow Museums, but it'd been kept at Glasgow Museums for many years due to the conditions at the Hill House being deemed too unstable and damaging for that piece to be in the house itself. So we were delighted when that piece came back to Helensburgh and to the house itself. Protection of the box has also brought the Trust in the House time to complete an even more comprehensive bank of research into the building, looking at the history of its ownership, changes to its fabric, alterations, repairs, and its upgrading. It's revealed to us now that we have a very precise history of alterations to the rough cast, revealing that very little of the original fabric remains. Most of it at some time or other has been removed, or repaired, patched. And this level of detail adds considerably to the previous philosophical discussions over the importance of the material via the significance of the design. We were being challenged at one point that you can't take the rough cast off because that's what's so precious, that's what's so important. But we now know that that's happened many times over in the history of the building. So in the case of some of the features, such as the stubbornly damp spot of the chimneys, you can see here as well the southeast chimney flue on that bottom right series of images. The stack itself has been taken down twice and already resurrected again 3 times. So there's been a lot of very interventionist work that in fact has already happened on the building, and we perhaps shouldn't be quite so prissy at times, let's say, about what we choose to do. And it makes it possible to find out just where the brick is. So we now know where the brick in the building is and not the stone. And this is where the moisture is. So we've been working really closely with our own governmental agency, Historic Environment Scotland, and their scientists. And we were able to measure where the moisture, even after years under the box, still remains. And from the blue elevations here, this is mainly flues and chimney stacks. I guess in some senses, this doesn't surprise us. It had 18 chimneys in the house, and they've long since been operation. They were either capped and airless or open to the rain before the box. And in either case, there was no longer the passive air movement associated with a normally functioning domestic house with a comfortable and consistent degree of heating being maintained inside. And these are some of the outputs with our partnership with Historic Environment Scotland: point cloud mapping of the building with data points enabling a fully interactive digital model of the building to be made, thermographic and microwave readings of the fabric, the creation of a BIM model of the house, which allows for real-time data to be mapped continuously onto the model, and which is effectively charting the pace of the drying out process. So that's our model, and we can kind of slice and dice that. I hope I have a tiny bit of time. This is only about a minute long, but it's just a slight video if 1 minute and 12 seconds. I'm not even looking at my watch, guys, because I'm still in San Francisco.
Please proceed.
Okay, it's not hugely long after this, but as I say, my head's scrambled. There's no audio to this, so I can waffle over it and take a slurp of my cold tea. After this, I'm going to just let you know now, brush my teeth, unpack, have a shower, look in the mirror, which will be a frightening thing after all the traveling, and probably phone my daughter and tell her I've landed. And while I'm filling the spaces here, I just want to say how amazing America was to visit. So I've been once ever to New York when I was a student. This is a long time since going back and going to San Francisco and Santa Barbara, and how wonderful the people in California was. I don't think there was one jarring incident. So America has gone up 2,000-fold from an impression I didn't even have, but I now realize what an incredible place, people, and food and coffee that you have there. So thank you, America. Right, I shall move on. I'll just pass. As I say, I've got vastly more images for you to suffer with. More recently, we've been working not so much in theory about the reasons for the damp at the house, but getting at last physical with hands-on removal of areas of the debonded rough cast and assessment of the stone underneath. Amazingly, the stone is of far better condition and quality than had been feared. It's well bedded, in lime traditionally and laid. Some of the vertical joints are what we'd call hungry and missing mortar, but that's not unusual. And most importantly, the stone was hard and strong. At first, we wondered if the myth of it dissolving like an aspirin was just simply wrong. But then we did two things. We immersed some of the stone in a glass of water for 24 hours, after which it has the rigidity, I would say, of a bar of Hershey's chocolate. One which you could snap bits off, and after a further 24 hours again, you could rub those broken off pieces into sand between your fingers. So that was interesting to see just what happens when water is introduced to that particular building. So it also toughens up immediately as well once you dry it out on a radiator over 3 days, and you can build in it. You can't even scratch into it. So it's a very interesting stone. So we also decided to test out the theory of the efflorescence of the stone on the inner warmer face. It's quite a thin layer. You can see that there in section. It's built up of 2 coats, but these cracks are, right the way through the skin of it to the red sandstone itself. So we opened up some section of the internal plasterwork, and this is what we found. On the image on the left, where the buildup of some of the dried stone dust, dry because of the box, has been keeping the building dry for now over 6 years, literally poured out of the walls like sand from an hourglass. So the theories were proven right. And without the box, that dust would in fact be probably moisture-laden sand that would sit across bridges and weaken floor joists and internal timber. The task is now underway to identify a new rough cast that is as thin as the original, has a similar texture and appearance, including when it rains, but will also have a degree of flexibility and breathability that will resist the micro cracking that allows this moisture that soaks the coating in the buildings. Once it's coming into that inner space, it is basically taking off about 1 inch of the surface of the stone. It was just frightening, and we figure that's probably the case around the building, and certainly in the solum of the building, that is what you would that's what we find, like termite hills in the basement. Oh, it's done something very odd again on the thing. I'm gonna have to jump forward. I'm just putting this up just for the last really few points in a way, which is to talk about the garden, and then to come round to the tea rooms and what we're hoping to do there as well, or not to do anything very much because it has completed as a project, but how we are making use of the wonderful willow tea rooms as well. So in the garden, we know for sure that the Blackies were very keen gardeners. We wondered at the outset, should we consider creating a Mackintosh garden? There's so many organic and flower references in the decoration of the house itself. And we wondered if Mackintosh had a hand in the designing of the garden, that little drawing that was on one of the early plans. We decided on balance, though, that there wasn't much evidence of this here or any Mackintosh design, in fact, which, while a little disappointing, does in fact make sense. Your architect rarely really stays around after they've handed over the building, usually for very good reasons, because that's the last you want to see of them. And gardens, of course, take years, decades even, to physically materialize at any scale. We know the Blackies were keen, possibly obsessive, definitely expert gardeners, but there was that small postage stamp size sketch on one of the early floor plans. And of course, in the artist's impression of the proposed house, there were very beautiful concepts of the gridded square beds, the geometric path lines, the trellises, again in tight square designs, and stylized trees. So we were keen to explore how the garden could come back and under what philosophical approach. There's not many images of the grounds, but those that we do have show an extensive kitchen garden. And of course, growing one's own food would have been especially important through the war years and the rationing that followed both of those. So you can see that there's definitely gardens there laid out as kitchen gardens. They'd have included soft fruit and orchards, but the garden also had a rose garden, a rockery used when the weather permitted as an outdoor classroom, an extensive cut flower garden for decorating the house with fresh blooms, a tennis and a croquet court, plus a wildflower garden and numerous trained and shaped bushes against walls and terracing. Quite how stylized it was possible to shape the plants if we wanted to try and achieve this again, really wasn't clear. But certainly when we studied what might be standard rose bushes cut lollipop fashion in the left in that semicircular entrance drive, our gardeners at the Trust were very pessimistic about the ability to keep a rose bush to that shape and maintain it as a flowering and good looking shrub. They also pointed out that the bush appears to be supporting a semicircular metal handrail that echoes the entrance sweep, and were definitely negative about the ability of a rose bush to keep up a metal handrail. So we had to concede to the much greater wisdom. And of course, the early photos don't show anything of that kind ever having been put into the house. So we dismissed it as an artistic conceit, never intended or implemented. But then somebody, I was speaking to a friend of mine at Glasgow University who used to be at the art school, pointed out that the same or similar had been used by Mackintosh at the art school, providing a dual function of bracing the large studio windows against strong gale force pressures on the timber frames, but also forming part of the supporting structure for the platforms for the window cleaners, ladders. Clean windows and pure light would have been essential for the study and practice of art in a smoggy industrial city. So maybe Mackintosh had intended for similar rose bushes to have lined in metal the driveway into the hill house, and maybe we should consider fabricating them in the project as well. I mean, it's one of the fun things we could consider, but you know, you get into the realms perhaps of conjecture that you can get criticized for quite quickly by purists or just good solid academics who like evidence. Finally, I just want to touch on the role of the tea rooms. The original willow tea rooms on Glasgow's Sauchiehall Street, the wider, this made it the wider Mackintosh Illuminated project. The tea rooms were acquired by the NTS in early last year after an exacting and expert restoration of the building by the dedicated Willow Tea Rooms Trust in 2019. It is the most complete example of Mackintosh's architectural remodelling and his collaboration with his wife, Margaret, in the total design and decoration of this exotic and very beautiful space in the city for their most prolific and easily one of their most loyal patrons, Kate Cranston, pictured above, a remarkable female entrepreneur who led the way really, and not just delivering temperance tea rooms and places of I guess, standing and politeness in the city, but also taking a risk. You know, they are not known for, this was the only series, I should say, of anything like it that existed in the UK that had this amount of adventure and dare in commissioning the work that she did in the interiors of the spaces. So at the Willow, Margaret and Mackintosh really designed everything from the chairs, the stained glass, the waitresses' uniforms, and the cutlery. And as I mentioned, the only thing that they didn't probably was the china itself, which was willow pattern. Quite apart from being an exceptional base for the appreciation of Mackintosh, the project also creates a new education and workshop space for outreach and engagement work with schools and community groups in particular. And the research and exhibition spaces, which are now open to the public, allow the Trust for the first time to base a major push to explain and publicise further the work of these remarkable artists and to showcase the arts and craft skills of the many people who'd worked on this and will continue to do so in the project at the Hill House. This is particularly important, and it's particularly something important to me, as increasingly alarm bells are being rung about the lack of heritage skills in the sector. We're losing time-served skills that have been passed down from generation to generation, and we're now struggling to find contractors who can work on our historic buildings. So That list above on the right, on the left, is what students at the art school would have been offered when enrolling in 1892. The schools trained designers at the time to the highest standards so that they could leave and make careers in furniture making, graphic and printing industries, interior design, commerce, a host of other applied and creative industries. I mean, everyone knows, and certainly while I was through in San Francisco, there's so much tech and so much emphasis on AI in every billboard. But there's certain things that people themselves still have to do, and you need people who are talented to physically do. The National Trust of Scotland, one of the main organisations that will feel the impact of this lack of skilled crafts, both in the conservation terms, the quality of what we can do, and in the increasing cost. It's an economic thing of a diminishing supply chain and pressure on market forces. So there's a need in these sectors that people with training can, if they have that training, can actually walk into jobs tomorrow. They're well paid, professional, skilled, interesting work. And so we hope that in encouraging training in projects such as this, we can add to that workforce. So finally, at the end of, central to everything we have to do is, of course, is we have to consult, we have to ask people. And as we've just embarked on this project in real time, we're aiming to rescue the Hill House and raise the profile of both Mackintosh and Margaret once and for all to that of one of the truly great artistic partnerships this country has ever seen. We applied for and were awarded a major National Lottery Heritage Grant at the start of the year, and we're now on a timeline to take the project forward and raise the remaining funding, some £10 million, before the planning permission on the box expires in late 2028, coinciding with Mackintosh's 100th anniversary of his passing, of his death. At the end of the public tour of the house in the box, we already asked the public the question as to what they think should happen. Should we remove the box and leave the house to gradually dissolve away without interference, let it go back to nature? Should we repair the house and then remove the box? Or should we repair the house and keep the box due to its popularity with so many visitors? Not surprising, perhaps. Most people overwhelmingly want the last option, which for reasons of planning permission and commitment to Historic Scotland and neighbours, and of the strong desire to see the building again in its context, we're not proposing to do. So that is a stark danger of consulting the public when you know the answer you want and you're not going to get it. So we're going to have to live with that. This was an even better quote we saw the other day, which was saying to us, simply keep the box and build another box over it to protect the first box. We love the box. So therein lies madness. So we're going to have to also just stop asking the public, as far as I'm concerned. No, we do love them. Really, I think, final slide, or last but one slide, the Trust is looking forward to seeing this magnificent house in its garden setting again, without its beautiful Meccano umbrella, by 2028. It's recently become the 200th member of the Iconic Houses Network and the only house in Scotland to be part of this worldwide web of 20th century homes, which include architects such as Antonio Gaudi, Alvar Aalto, Frank Lloyd Wright again, Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier. And we hope in 2028 to announce the start of a bid again, because we've tried once, for World Heritage Site status, not just for Mackintosh's buildings, but for the design, the art, the products, and the extraordinary movement that flourished in this small corner of Scotland, and for an intense period at the turn of the last century. It may have shocked, surprised, delighted, and inspired a truly original period of complete creativity and innovation. So I think it's just watch this space, really, and I'm going to say thank you there. I love this broadsheet for the colours on it, so I've just put that up as the last picture. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing. If I can hit the right button here, hold on, find it.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
I would say it was extraordinary. It was just outstanding. I'm a retired architect myself, Liz, and you left no stone unturned. So it was extremely well done. Question, answer, comments for Liz.
I am trying to hit stop share, but I don't know if you can do it from your end. My cursor doesn't seem to want to find it at the moment.
Let me see if I can. Gus, Dawn, haven't had to do this before.
I'm not sure.
Okay. I think I just have the Zoom screen up now, so I've really goofed up. All right, well, let's open the floor to discussion, please. Tony, I'll call on you. What do you have to say?
Well, I thought it was fascinating. Congratulations, Liz. I think this is an extraordinary story. I wanted to ask you something about the Willow Tea Rooms, though. I think the National Trust for Scotland did something quite remarkable in creating the partnership that allowed the preservation of the building and the interiors while still operating as a commercial entity. So is that working?
Yeah. Yeah, it had a tough time, the tea rooms. I showed you that image of Miss Cranston, as you probably know, the lady who is leading the trust was the kind of modern day reincarnation, a wonderful woman called Celia Sinclair, who decided and took it upon herself as a self-made entrepreneur that she was going to wrest it back from, oh, here we are. Start your video. Oh, no, I was asking something else. Never mind. So the tea rooms were delivered, thankfully, by that independent trust, a small charity, into over 3 years, I think, and opened in 2019. It would have been the second building opening because, of course, at the time we thought that the art school would have been opening as well after its first fire. So that was also within a month of it. Anyway, they opened. The art school certainly didn't, sadly. But because of the fire at the art school, that created utter chaos in that part of Glasgow. It was such a huge, devastating fire, and the disruption to streets all around it was just terrible. Followed by COVID, followed by just economic collapse of the high street, really, and Sauchiehall Street in particular. So it was a brave move. I totally agree that the National Trust took it on. Commercially, I think it is still undergoing a period of review. In fact, one of the things we're looking at is, as you know, I'm sure, the name The Willow Tea Rooms, which I use as a shortcut because it is The Willow Tea Rooms, was taken off by somebody as a copyrighted name to not a Willow Tea Rooms elsewhere, and it's made into a chain, which is really irritating and annoying, but we can't get it back. So that's one of the issues in trying to find it. You know, if you Google it and TripAdvisor it or whatever, and we're having to work through that. And I think there's still a period of adjustment between the they've got some amazing staff, and the work they've been doing with engagement and outreach in schools and multi-ethnic groups in the area has been fabulous. I think we've a lot to learn from the people at the Willow. But financially, it's a tricky one. It has to really hit the mark of hitting a quality product, and it also has to be somewhere people feel they can happily go to and sit down and not feel it's too formal. So I think it's still finding its feet a little bit. It's pretty busy. It's doing okay, I think, but I think it's still in a period of transition and as to what it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Liz, this was a terrific presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I was texting with our Tony's friend and my friend Andy Scott just while you were talking, and I know that you were with Andy over in San Francisco.
Indeed, yes, he's fantastic. And actually, just to say, I felt wrong in doing it somehow because he introed me in the San Francisco lecture I had to give to the St. Andrew Society, which was a great little evening while I was there anyway. And he'd inserted 6 of his own slides of the Mackintosh sculpture, which I have got here, but I thought it now doesn't have relevance because Andy's not here. So I'd actually put it beyond the end of this slide. It's probably still there actually if I move down. Oh, maybe it's not. Sorry, but yeah, Andy's work is fantastic, and he's on a crusade a little bit, having done the Mackintosh sculpture, which is remarkable. I think it's just captured the man totally. To do one also of Margaret.
Yeah.
We'd love to do that.
Right.
And I think Sauchiehall Street might well be the place it should be. I'm not sure. Although some people say they were so inseparable, we shouldn't have them in different places. So that'll be maybe more than one sculpture of Margaret.
Liz, I'd just like to comment on the incredible job the NTS has done with all the buildings you've acquired. And for those of you who don't know, you can buy a ticket and go to all the National Trust Scotland venues and historic landmark buildings and tour for the single price. I believe that's still in place. And if you haven't seen this Hill House, I would urge you all to go while the box is still up. I love the
Yes.
box too, but it's just amazing. It's an amazing experience.
Yes, I'd endorse that as well. Definitely. Right. I think I've cancelled the lecture. That's good. I've taken it off, haven't I? So we're back to a screen now, are we?
Yes, but we can't see you, dear. And if you can
Sorry.
activate your camera, that would be lovely.
Yeah. Ta-da-da, that should come back up. Doesn't want me.
I'm completely struck by the similarities between the Frank Lloyd Wright work and the Charles Rennie Mackintosh and Margaret work. And it just makes me wonder, I mean, they were born just a few months apart. And I hope somebody will do some research and write a book on this. Because I
Tony Jones is your man for that.
Oh, Tony has?
I don't know, but he might well have. I'm sure he must know all about Frank Lloyd Wright. And being Welsh, he'd be, I mean, he wasn't born in Wales or anything, Tony, was he? But he had Welsh connections, so as do I. So I'm half Welsh and half Scottish. I must say one thing of my, nothing to do with the elective, but I went to the De Jong Art Institute in San Francisco while I was there, and a lovely curator came up to me and said something about how you have to wear your rucksack on the front, which done very politely and very friendly. And then he heard my accent. He said, "Are you Scottish?" And I said, "Well, yeah, my father's Scottish." "Oh, we have to," he grabbed my hands, "we have to thank you for Sean Connery." And I said, "Oh, that's very kind of you. I don't think I can take the credit for Sean Connery." And I said, "And actually, I'm half Welsh." "Oh," he said, "oh my God." And he absolutely took both my hands. He said, "We and my aunts and my mother absolutely have to thank you for Tom Jones." And I thought, well, this is all good. I'm enjoying this. So I did take that one. And I need to credit at a time of need. I mean, it's now irrelevant, sadly, for the reason of the fire. But Tony, I do remember, having never met you in the flesh, I reached out to you when there was going to be a rather large, unattractive building to be built on the south site next to the art school, and we were looking for names that would matter to write in and object, and somebody suggested writing to you in Chicago, and I thought, well, why will this man write? Anyway, you wrote us an absolute storming letter, and we did win at that point the planning appeal to stop this building going up. Sadly, it's back in now because everything's back to, you know, a bit of a ground zero state over there. But at the time, you wrote a very, very strong and wonderful letter, actually, that did have impact on the planning authority. So that was much valued from us.
Well, I think these rascals are still trying to build that building, so I'm perfectly happy to write another letter.
Yes, good. You may well be called upon by the director, the new director now. I'm no longer at the school itself, obviously, but I keep an eye on what's going on there.
I do too. But I just go back to this Frank Lloyd Wright story. You know, to try and make this clear, there's absolutely no connection between the two. The commonality is their love for Japan and their interest in the geometry of Japan and the sensitivity of measurement, tatami mats, etc. Mackintosh, you know, absolutely loved that. Frank Lloyd Wright knew all about Mackintosh, but Mackintosh could not possibly have known about Frank Lloyd Wright. It is impossible because there were no publications. Mackintosh could not have seen an illustration of a Frank Lloyd Wright building. But there is no connection there at all. But Frank Lloyd Wright, during his life, only permitted the exhibition of the work of another architect in his studio. And that was when Tom Howarth from Glasgow had a carry-around exhibition in a suitcase of photographs of the work of Charles Rennie Mackintosh. And Frank Lloyd Wright allowed those to be shown in the studios at Taliesin West. It's the only time that Wright ever did that. So Wright knew about Mackintosh, but Mackintosh could not possibly have known about Wright. This doesn't, reduce the genius of Wright in any way. But I think Wright saw immediately a commonality, an interest, a kind of spiritual connection between Mackintosh and what Wright was doing. But I interviewed Eric Wright, who was Frank's son, and he confirmed that Mackintosh was a great star, and that Wright knew about this work and admired this work. He didn't connect with it in terms of copying it in any way.
Yeah.
But that connection was certainly there.
It's good to know.
Oh, yes, the referencing is just throughout. The light fixtures, the decorative elements, the line, and the I'll stop there, but I'm so pleased to know this, Tony. Thank you for explaining. Don't be shy. I know we have some artists or artisans or architects out there that would love to comment. Okay. Well, I'll tell you, this has been just such an extreme pleasure. We need to have Gus more. I think we need to have more architecture and architectural history presentations. But thank you all for participating in this forum every month. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't be able to keep it going. And preserve our heritage and our culture and celebrate it together. And thank you so much for your support of Caledonia. And I just want to, I think we're building momentum globally, and the support will consolidate. Organizations are working together more closely, and as are clans. And I just think we're on the horizon of a very great zenith in the future. So I'm very inspired, and keep up the good work, all of you. You're all great Scots.
Connie?
Yes, ma'am?
Yes, Sandy Jones Stanisek.
Yes.
I'm just holding up the book, Frank Lloyd Wright, The Architect of Defiance, in case no one knows about it.
That's nice.
Jonathan Adams, the architect of the Millennium Center in Cardiff. And it's heavy, but it's very comprehensive. My husband, who's an artist, complains that the drawings are too small and there are way too many words. But if you have the courage to tackle it, I've just learned about it myself through the Welsh Society of Western New England did an interview with Jonathan Adams, and he became enthralled with Frank Lloyd Wright, and this is part of the architecture series of Wales. So if anyone's interested, the man is Jonathan Adams. The book is Frank Lloyd Wright, The Architect of Defiance, and it gives a lot of credit to his mother and the God Almighty Joneses. So it really incorporates their story, as opposed to some people who have not been as kind to her. So pick it up or order it, and it's great fun.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Liz, I would love to get your email address, so I will depend on Gus and Dawn. I would like to follow up with you. But thank you all. Until we meet next month, be well, be safe, God bless.
Yes. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Nice to meet
Thank you.
Bye.
Wonderful.
And take care.
Bye.